Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video looking at National 5 Chemistry and Unit 2. Today we're going to have a look at reactions of hydrocarbons, specifically reactions of alkenes. And we're going to firstly start off about giving you a couple of definitions of saturated and unsaturated and why these reactions are quite important. So saturated and unsaturated are terms that you'll hear quite a lot when we categorise hydrocarbons. And saturated hydrocarbons do not contain any carbon-to-carbon double bonds. They only have single carbon-to-carbon bonds. So saturated hydrocarbons only contain carbon-to-carbon single bonds. Now this is the important part. So, saturated single, that's how I remember it. So, alkanes. These are saturated because alkanes only have carbon-to-carbon single bonds in their chains. So, here's propane as an example. The bonds between the carbons are all single bonds, no double bonds at all. So you can probably imagine unsaturated hydrocarbons contain at least one carbon-to-carbon double bond. For example, and here we have our alkenes. And here's propene as an example for you. Propene is an unsaturated hydrocarbon. It contains one carbon-carbon double bond. Another example for your saturated would be your cycloalkanes. There are no double bonds in cyclopropane, only carbon-carbon single bonds, and obviously your carbon to hydrogen bonds, but those aren't the important bonds that we look at. So I was talking about the bonds between our carbons. So here we have single carbon-carbon bonds, so they are saturated. Here, although we do have single, this has a double bond, and because it has a double bond, it is unsaturated. Now, there is a test for unsaturation. And this is quite important, and we need to know this in National 5. So the test for unsaturation. Unsaturated hydrocarbons will decolorize bromine water or bromine solution. So what do I mean by that? Bromine solution is a kind of brownish orange colour, depending on how concentrated it is. And it does a very specific reaction with this double bond in our alkenes or anything that's unsaturated. And what happens is that the colour from the bromine solution disappears when it reacts with our unsaturated hydrocarbons. So the bromine solution goes from an orangey brown colour to colourless. And that's what you would expect to see. This would be your test to see if you have a double bond, to see if you have an alkene in a solution if you were given an unknown solution. It's really important to note that it is the bromine solution that decolorizes and not the alkene. The alkene doesn't have a colour. The alkene itself is likely to be colourless, but the bromine solution is the orangey brown colour, and it's the bromine solution that goes from orange brown to colourless if you have an alkene present. So that is your test for unsaturation. Now, let's have a talk about this. Our alkenes are more reactive than our alkanes, and that's because of our carbon-carbon double bond. So if we have a look, I'll move over to these molecular models. If we have a look, this is ethene. We have our carbon-carbon double bond in the middle. And having two bonds in between the carbons is not the most stable arrangement for these carbons. And so this double bond reacts quite easily. So I'm going to demonstrate what would happen with our bromine solution and why it would decolorise. And that will show you the reaction that takes place here. So we have our double bonds, we have our alkene, and here we have essentially a representation of bromine. So each of these atoms is a bromine atom. Now bromine is diatomic. There are two atoms joined together by a single bond here. This is bromine as a molecule, Br2. Now if these two reactants were going to react together, the first thing that has to happen, it's a good sound, is my double bond has to break. The double bond between the carbons breaks. The double bond between the carbons breaks, and the single bond between the two bromine atoms also breaks. Now I'm given these. Now I have a space on this carbon and I have a space here on this carbon, and that leaves room for the bromine to add in across my double bond one atom on each carbon. And this, ignore the fact that we have long bonds in here, these would still be shorter ones. We use long just because of the molecular model kit, but I have a bromine on each of these carbons, and this would be my final product. This has resulted in a saturated hydrocarbon. There are no double bonds present now. And also the bromine, because it has broken apart, because it's added in here, the bromine isn't in there anymore. The bromine has broken apart and added in, and so the colour from the bromine has gone. That's why we go to colourless. So if I were to draw this out, this is, in this case, ethene is what I used there, so we'll draw that out. Here's ethene. Okay. And I'm going to add bromine. Now we don't need to represent anything about the bonds breaking, we just need to show what actually happens. So think about what I did with this molecular model. My double bond broke, and the single bond here broke, and the two bromines added onto the carbons which contained the double bond, which means I only have two carbons in this case. I end up with something that looks like this. This molecule here. Now, we've spoken before, these single bonds you can twist around. I'll move that pen out of the way. You can twist around, and so these positions on the carbon, so this carbon here, these three positions, because these are all single bonds, these are equal, because if I were to turn and twist, this bromine goes here. I've got a hydrogen here just now. If I twist even more, the bromine goes here, and it keeps going as I twist. So the three positions are equal, so it doesn't actually matter if you've put the bromine here, here, or here on this carbon, or here, here, and here on this carbon. The three positions are equal. What does matter is that you put the bromine one on each carbon which contain the double bond. If both of these were on the same carbon, that would be the incorrect answer. Now, this type of reaction, overall, these are addition reactions. Quite easy to remember. And they're addition reactions because we have taken two things, we have added them together to make one product. I've added this in, I've added it across the double bond to make my product. This specific addition reaction is a bromination. Or you might see the term halogenation because I'm adding a halogen. So this is a specific type of addition reaction, and that's quite important. We need to know that this is an addition reaction, but we also need to know that we are performing a halogenation or bromination. In this case, we're adding bromine, so it's a bromination. This can also happen if I look at hydrogenation. Hydrogenation. Now, hydrogenation is when I add a hydrogen across a double bond. That is an H. So let's take ethene again. Let's add hydrogen. Now remember, hydrogen is another diatomic molecule. And the same concept applies. I'm going to break open the double bond, I'm going to break this bond, and these two atoms go on the two carbons which contain the double bond. In this case, I end up making the alkane with the same number of carbons. So I've gone from the alkene to the alkane here because I've added hydrogen. So this is a hydrogenation. Hydrogenation is the addition of hydrogen across a double bond. And then the last one is if we add water. If you add water to yourself, if you've not drank enough during the day, you're hydrating yourself, and we're doing the same thing with a molecule. So this is called hydration. And in hydration, we're going to add water across a double bond, and I'm going to show you that one with a molecular model kit just so you can see what happens. So here's ethene, and here is water. Okay, we'll draw it out so we can see the bonds, we can see what we are adding. Now, if I remake my ethene from before, hear the molecular model popping. So here's my ethene from before, and now I have water adding in. So here the red one is my oxygen, the two white ones are my hydrogen. Same concept applies. I'm going to take my alkene, I'm going to break the double bond, and this time I'm going to take my water and I'm going to break between the oxygen and one hydrogen, so I end up with a hydrogen and an OH. And these are the two things that are going to add on to my carbons. So I'm going to add a hydrogen on here, I'm going to add the OH on here. Okay, it's a little ethanol dog. So this type of molecule is called an alcohol, and we'll look at them in the next section of Unit 2, but we just need to know what this makes just now. So looking at this here, I'm going to break that double bond, I'm going to break across one of these single bonds, and what I end up with is one carbon where the hydrogen goes on and the other carbon where an OH goes on. Now I write this as OH just joined together like this. You might want to have a bond to the H showing the bond, that's totally fine, either way is acceptable. What is vitally important is that this bond goes from the carbon to the oxygen, because that's what has happened here. It does not go onto the hydrogen because hydrogen can't form two bonds. So you have to have that bond going from the carbon onto the oxygen, which we have here. This is hydration. So bromination or halogenation, hydrogenation and hydration. These are your three different kinds of addition reactions. They're specific addition reactions. There's one small thing to maybe think about when we do this. I'll turn this over. Let's have a look here. This is propene. Okay, so you might call it propanine, you don't need to because these would be identical. But let's think about adding water onto propene. Okay, so I'm just taking my water apart again, putting it back together. So here is propene, here is my double bond. Same concept applies. I break the double bond and I break across an oxygen hydrogen bond in my water. Now, I'm going to put this here and I'm going to put this one on here. Now if I draw that out, so let's say I've taken propene, I've added water, and in this case I have made, I'll draw this out with a bond so you can see what I was meaning before, this here, this here, okay, where this hydrogen and this OH have come from my water. I just decided to put these on this way round. I could have taken my water and I could have done this a slightly different way. I could have added the hydrogen onto the end and the OH onto the middle. Now, no amount of twisting and turning of this molecule is going to get this OH onto the end. And this is a really interesting thing that can happen. If my alkene is unsymmetrical in this case, then I can form two possible products with all the same parts, all the same atoms, just arranged in a slightly different structure. And you might remember that this is called isomers, and these are isomers of each other. They are the same in terms of number of carbons, number of hydrogens, number of oxygens, but this OH is on the middle carbon here and it's on the end carbon here. These are isomers of each other, so you have to be careful if there is an unsymmetrical alkene and you're adding something that is unsymmetrical, then you can form two products. It wouldn't be the same if I had butene, because with butene it is symmetrical. So if I break that double bond, now let's add, this time I'm going to add in just HCl. It's unsymmetrical, but it's still two atoms, so it would be the same as bromination, hydrogenation, or hydration. I would break here and add a hydrogen and a chlorine into my molecule. That would give me this molecule here. Okay, that would give me this molecule here. Now, I wouldn't get two products this time, because if I put the chlorine on this carbon instead of this one, it's just this molecule rotated round. Remember, when we are always numbering things, we always number at the side closest to the functional group, closest to the double bond, closest to the branch. The same would happen here. I would be numbering closest to the chlorine. So if it was here, I would be numbering from this end. If it was on here, I'd be numbering from this end. It's the same thing, but it's flipped over. So because this was symmetrical, I only get one product. Because this is unsymmetrical, and what I'm adding in is unsymmetrical, I end up with two isomers as my product. So it's very important that you know this. So we have three different types of addition reaction, just to remind you. So we summary in our addition reactions, we have bromination or halogenation if it's a halogen, we have hydrogenation, and we have hydration. You can add any other small molecule, such as this would be HCl. If it was any kind of diatomic, you can add that across a double bond too. But the ones you need to know the names of, the specific addition reactions, are bromination, hydrogenation, and hydration. Overall, these are all addition reactions, but you would be expected, if asked what type of reaction is this, you would be asked to say a hydrogenation reaction and not an addition reaction. And really important, again, just to know that you can make isomers if you had an unsymmetrical alkene, and you can have one product only if it was a symmetrical alkene that you are using. This is vitally important when it comes to testing to see if things are saturated, and the reason for that is, remember, our bromine solution was an orangey brown colour, but when it saturates, all single bonds, remember saturated, single, when it saturates our alkene, then that colour goes away, and that is our test for unsaturation. This section concludes the first kind of third or so of Unit 2, looking at homologous series and the reactions of hydrocarbons. You can get a lot of problem solving kind of questions applying what we've done so far, so it is important that you go through and you make sure you are happy with the concepts, because you might see these concepts in a different context. So once we've done this, we'll start moving on to looking at everyday consumer products and acids and